Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Harry from Dots, and it's time for class. Our topic today: democracy and citizens' participation. And our facilitator is already in class, but we are going to give 5 more minutes for others to join in, and then we kickstart. Please, inform your party members to join into class. Thank you.
Jenny.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Once again, this is 1705 and it's time for class. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction about facilitator for today's class, Mr. Tony. Okay. Mr. Tony Usadamen, I hope I did not order it, is a renowned communications expert and social commentator. He's the founder of Uboro, a Nigerian-based marketing communications consultancy, providing services to individuals, businesses, and governments across West Africa. Tony is also an advocate of good governance and civic responsibility. He's the convener of the I Am Edo, a movement. Okay, Tony is also an advocate of good governance and civic responsibility. He's the convener of I Am Edo, a movement of young Edo professionals which seek to inspire pride and patriotism in all people of Edo heritage. So, ladies and gentlemen, our facilitator for today's class, Mr. Tony, will be taking us on democracy and citizens' participation. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Wumi. I just want to I would like to establish if everyone can hear me clearly. If you can, please indicate in the comments that you can hear me. If you can't, I'd rather use my earpiece, but if you can't hear me, then we can continue. Awesome, Mohammed, thanks for the confirmation. So I take it that everyone else can hear me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure once again to take this class, Democracy and Citizen Participation. I will try to run through my slides as quickly as possible so that at the end of the session, we can take some questions and answers. But if anywhere along the course of this presentation, there are issues that you disagree with, you can indicate also in the comments so that I can speak to those issues. And then if you have questions, please note them for later on at the end of the session. So once again, it's great to have everyone here. And I hope that we learn something from this session. Yes, Lisa is going to try to share my screen. I don't know, I've had a problem sharing my screen. And I see a hand raised. Okay, no. All right. Lisa, can you make the presentation a little bolder so everyone can see? Let me attempt. That still looks a bit small. Even I can hardly see, but let me attempt to share here. Okay, it's a challenge. Lisa, let's work with what you have so that we don't keep the class waiting. Let's try to work with what you have. Can we get some visual? Okay, shall we move to the first slide, please? Oh wow, this is a challenge. It's too small.
We can actually see it a bit from here.
No, I'm struggling. I'm struggling, and I need to be able to see this to go through this class. Okay. So I would try. I'm unable to share my screen. Never mind if from the camera I don't seem to be looking into the camera. I'm going to try and speak from my screen, looking at my screen, and Lisa is going to try to keep up with me as much as possible. Okay. So the very first slide, an outline of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about different forms of government, from anarchism to autocracy, oligarchy to democracy. Then we'll take a quick look at democracy, its meaning and practice. We'll look at the variants of democracy that we have and the challenges of democracy as a system of government. Then we would look at the concepts of citizenship, the most important concepts of citizenship. That is, citizens as users and consumers, citizens as shapers and makers. And then we would x-ray issues in modern day citizenship. And finally, see how to build an active citizen participation. So, what is government? In simple terms, government is the body with the power to make and enforce laws, to control a country, a land area, a people, or an organization. I'll take that again. Government is the body with the power to make and or enforce laws, to control a country, a land area, a people, or an organization. So most times when people talk about government, they usually think countries, but the concept of government extends beyond territories. It also extends to organizations as well. That is why in the corporate world, you would hear terms like corporate governance. They all mean the same thing. Laws that guide the relationships and interactions between people within either a geographical region, a territory, a land area, or an organization. So in simple terms, this is what government means. And most societies agree that the existence of government is morally justified. Now, let's quickly look at the types of government that there are. Technically speaking, there are 4 major types of government. There are other subsets of these 4, but we'll just look at these 4. The first is called anarchism. And anarchism means rule by none. Rule by none. It's a society without a publicly enforced government or political authority, where leadership is assumed by one person or a polity without any challenge from any external parties or any internal control mechanisms. One person asserts control over a country or a geographical region. Oh, sorry, no, this is anarchism. Anarchism is basically where there is no rule by none. In practice, anarchism may not exist, but I shall explain in the course of our discussions why, even in other forms of government, anarchism rears its head. So just a correction again, anarchism is rule by none, technically means rule by none. That is a lawless country. Please permit the error I made earlier. I was referring to autocracy. Anarchism is rule by none. Now, autocracy is rule by one. It's a system of government in which supreme power rests in the hands of one person or a polity. It's what I was trying to talk about earlier, where no one can contest this person's or this individual's decisions. And we're talking absolute monarchies, like the types you have in Saudi Arabia, in Oman, in Brunei, in the UAE, and dictatorships like what you have in North Korea. So those are examples of country where autocracy as a form of government seems to be practiced. Autocracy, again, is rule by one. Now, the other form of government is oligarchy, and oligarchy simply means rule by a few. It is a form of power structure in which power rests with a small number of people. And now there are different distinguishing factors for these people. You have the aristocracy, which actually has to do with rule by the aristocrats, the nobility. You have plutocracy, which is ruled by the wealthy, where the wealthiest people in the society determine how the society is run. You have meritocracy, another form of oligarchy, which is ruled by the meritorious. By that, I mean the most talented in a society. So you have the best of musicians, the best of engineers, the best of doctors, deciding how a state or a geographical region is run. And then the final, under oligarchy, which is ruled by a few, is called theocracy. And theocracy actually is supposed to mean ruled by God. But in this sense, an individual assumes that role, a religious leader, such as you have in countries like Iran. Iran can be said to be an example of a theocratic state. And that leads us to the fourth type of government, fourth most popular type of government, because like I said, these are the four major categories, but there are other subsets of government that we're not discussing within the context of this presentation. So the fourth is democracy, which is rule by many. The most popular definition of democracy is that it is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I'm sure this is what you hear most of the time when they talk about democracy. Now, we'll look at democracy as a form of government in more detail. We'll look at the origin and the practice of democracy. Now, if I asked everyone in this class to say what they think about the term democracy, the answers I'm likely to get are answers like this: government of the people, like I mentioned before, the will of the majority, competition for political power, the right to voice opinions, freedom to be part of any organization, equality rights and representation, free market, citizen action, and elections. These are the common phrases or ideas that come to mind when you think democracy. Now, how did democracy start? First and foremost, let's talk about the term, the etymology of the word democracy. So democracy is derived from the Greek word demokratia, which is coined from two words. The first is demos, meaning people, and kratos, meaning rule. And it was thought to have started in the middle of the 5th century. However, there is evidence to suggest that in the very, very many years, especially among the non-literate tribal society, those years, those thousands of years where human beings survived simply by hunting and gathering, democracy existed in a certain form, even if at the most primitive level. However, with greater inequalities in wealth amongst these different communities, and as the sizes of these communities became so big that it was impossible to manage at those micro levels, and as some assumed greater wealth and political or military power, they tended to exert control over the smaller countries or geographical regions. That was what gave rise to the hierarchical or authoritarian forms of social organization, and then democracy, as was practiced, like I said, in those non-literate tribal societies where people survived by hunting and gathering, gave way to thousands of years of governments based on monarchy, like we talked about, aristocracy, and oligarchy. But then around 500 BCE, conditions favorable to democracy re-emerged. People started to organize themselves in small groups again to create forms of government. So that primitive democracy that we discussed before that existed in the non-literate tribal societies gave way to a more sophisticated form of democracy, call it an advanced form of democracy. And the place where these seem to have taken place are areas around the Mediterranean, talking about Greece and Rome. Now, we will look at the different variants of democracies, the variants of democracy that we have. Broadly speaking, there are two types. There is the direct or participatory democracy. That's a form of government in which the people themselves make legislative decisions rather than delegate power to elected representative. Now, this form of democracy is seen as the purest form of democracy. And what comes to mind when you think of direct or participatory democracy are referendums and petitions, where all voters have the right to make decisions that concerns them. For instance, in the most recent years, there have been many examples. There's the Swedish referendum in 1957 and 1980. There's the Australian referendum in 1977, the New Zealand referendum in 1992, the Scottish referendum, where people of Scotland voted whether or not to be a part of the United Kingdom, is one of the most recent examples of this pure form of democracy that we're talking about. Of course, you know that 55% of Scottish people voted to remain in the UK during this referendum, voted yes to stay in the UK, while only about 45% voted no, meaning they wanted to remain as a part of the United Kingdom. More recently, you would remember Brexit, which took place in 2016, where the British people voted whether or not to be part of the EU. And as you know, that was how the decision was made for Britain to exit from the European Union and become a separate entity. So this is what direct democracy or participatory democracy means, where it is the people themselves who are making legislative decisions instead of entrusting this or vesting the power on elected representatives. Now that leads us to the second variant of democracy, which is the representative or the indirect form of the democracy. And this is a form of government in which legislation is enacted by representatives elected by the people themselves, in contrast to what I just described above, the participatory or direct democracy. The majority of the people decide to delegate their power to a few people who they trust and believe have whether the knowledge or the ability to be able to make decisions on their behalf. So in this case, the minority is mandated to act on behalf of the majority as expressed by the majority themselves, vesting power to these people to make decisions on their behalf. So those are the two popular variants of democracy that we have. Now, let us look at the comparative advantage of democracy compared to other form of government. Now, it's important to note that democracy won't be the most popular form of government in the world. Today, there are about 195 countries. 193 are member states of the United Nations, and only 2 are not part of the United Nations. Now, of this 195 or 193, depending on how you look at it, about 167 practice democracy. Now, democracy as a system of government wouldn't have fared so well or wouldn't have gained as much popularity if people believed that another form of government were better than democracy. But does it mean that democracy is the best form of government? That's an open question to all of us. But for me, I would not say that democracy is the best form of government. I believe that it has its advantages, which we will look at in comparison to other forms of government. But I also believe that different states, depending on their peculiar situations, can have variants or different forms of government that are better suited to their particular situation. But we're going to look at why democracy as a system of government seem to have fared better than most other forms of government. Now, in theory, states with democratic governments are thought to prevent rule by autocrats. So if democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, ideally, in a perfect democracy, practiced as it should be, it would not support the emergence of autocrats. By autocrats, we discussed this earlier. Those are people who exercise almost supreme control over a people in any geographical area or country. But in practice, you would see that even in democratic settings or in acclaimed democratic settings, there are still some form of autocracy. There is still some form of autocracy going on even in a democratic government. We'll look at those examples later. Now, democracy comparatively is also taught to guarantee fundamental individual rights. That is because it caters to the rights of the majority. Democracy is thought to allow for a relatively high level of political equality. That is because people are allowed to make decisions as to matters that concerns them, as we do during elections when we go to exercise our free will to choose the people that we want to represent us. Now, whether or not the systems in a democratic government allow for the free will of the people to be fully expressed is another matter completely. But as a system of government compared to other forms of government, it is sought to guarantee a higher level of political equality. And it is also thought to better foster human development. That's based on the indices of development, indices such as education, health, equality, rights of the people, those indices that you would use to say, yes, this is a successful or a failed state. Democracy is thought to do better based on those indices than every other form of government. And finally, democracy is thought to provide more prosperity for citizens. Like I said, these are the general thoughts around. I don't agree that democracy necessarily is the best form of government that we can have as a people. But like I said, it would not have fared so well or gained this much popularity where almost 2/3 of the countries of the world are practicing democracy as their preferred system of government. You can also have your opinion, and I would like to hear it at some point, maybe in the comment session or at the end of this presentation, when we'll be having an opportunity to make remarks or ask questions. Now, let's look at the challenges of democratic governance. So for all these benefits that I just highlighted for democracy in comparison to other forms of government, it is not without its challenges. Now, I did mention earlier that even though democracy is thought to guarantee the well-being of the majority, and democracy is supposed to be the government of the people, government for the people, in practice, other forms of governance can actually influence how democracy is practiced. That may disrupt the way that democracy was intended. For instance, even in Nigeria, where we say, not just in Nigeria, let's use the US, because the US is supposed to be the cradle of, I don't know, it started in Greece, but the US in Greece and Rome, but the US has come to be recognized as the major promoter of democracy around the world. Now, even in the US, you would see that there are other forms of government at play, even within this so-called democratic system, because you still see different power blocks that are the ones deciding who the next president or the next governors would be. And somehow, or sometimes, some of these presidents or these governors or elected government officials, whoever they are actually lame duck public officials because there are people behind power brokers who are controlling them. So this is an example of a democratic state where it is still being influenced by other form of government. In this case, I've talked about plutocracy, where, or meritocracy, where the wealthy or people from noble birth or people of power and influence are making decisions behind the scenes. So outside, it looks like a system that has been really, really run by the people. But behind the scenes, it is possible that only a few people are actually running the government. Now, under the governments, coming down to the case of Nigeria, under the government of Buhari, how many times did it feel for you that it seemed like Nigeria was running on autopilot, as if there was nobody in charge? And I can say that even in this current government, there are times when it has felt like that we did not have a government. So even though we say we are practicing democracy, you would see that in some way, anarchism does rear its head. It does appear as if there is no government in place at all in Nigeria. I mean, look at the things that are happening currently in the country. The spate of kidnappings, the killings in different parts of the country. These are signs that the political leadership is actually not in control of the country. So even though we claim to be practicing democracy, somehow it seems to be an anarchical government. So we have seen how even in this so-called democratic system of government that has all of these benefits that are reeled out, it still has its challenges, whereby other forms of government still come to play even within a democracy. We've seen anarchism, as in the case of Nigeria. We've seen plutocracy, oligarchy, as in the case of the US and very many other countries of the world. So democracy, for all its wonderful benefits, still has its challenges. Again, it's still open to debate whether or not it is the best form of government. You have your say on that. But just a reminder that it will not be this popular and it will not be adopted over other systems of government by most countries of the world if any other of these forms of government were thought to be better. Now, let's move to citizenship, which is really what this presentation is about. Citizenship is two sides of a coin. It is tied to the very idea of democracy. Democracy is the first name, and citizenship is the last name. And this is a quote by a Latin American activist. And I agree with this very much, as we would see. Now, there are two popular concepts of citizenship. The first concept is the idea of citizens as users and consumers. And this idea started to gain traction around the 18th century. Debates around citizenship were based on the understanding that it is the government that will determine what the rights and responsibilities of the people are. So the idea is that the people are not capable of making these decisions by themselves. The people are onlookers, right? And the government defines what their role is within a geographical space. And the place of the citizen, the place of a model citizen, is to just follow almost blindly what the government has determined. Excuse me. like I said, the belief around this concept is that the people are incapable of making decisions for themselves. They do not have sufficient knowledge to determine policies that will be best for them. And so they have to rely on their leaders to solve the problems. Now, a lot has changed from this time to present day, as we'll see in the next slide, where we'll look at the concept of citizens as shapers and makers. Now, still talking about the other concept, citizens as users that we looked at earlier, you would see the advocates are saying it is not that people are politically incompetent or are distracted by the consumer economy. Rather, it is the continued concentration of power in the hands of a few, the belief that the more involvement by people in decisions affecting them would improve both the government and the people's quality of life. So at some point, people started to advocate that, no, it is not that we cannot make decisions for ourselves. It is not that we don't know what is good for us. It is because only a few people are making decisions. And if only a few people are making decisions, then they cannot determine for the majority what is best for them. So the concept started to move from, oh, we're only consumers, we're only users who have no say, who are only sitting on the sidelines and are only taking instructions from the leadership. But we are now partakers. We are also stakeholders in this project of nation building. And we have a say, or we should have a say, in how things work. And according to the Institute of Development Studies UK, new approaches to social citizenship seek to move beyond seeing the states as bestowing rights and demanding responsibilities of subjects, that is us, the people. In doing so, the aim is to bridge the gap between citizens and the states by recasting citizenship as practiced rather than given. This recognizes the agency of citizens as makers and shapers rather than as users and choosers. Let me pause for a second here and just check if the class is following me, because I was looking at my screen all the while. If you're following what I've been saying so far, can you indicate in the comment section? Are we following? There are 52 of us in the class. Yes, Richard, thank you. Ahmed. I see that some very dear person is in this class. I see you, and thank you for attending. So yes, I'm convinced that we're following, so let's go on now. Now, let us look at the issues in modern day citizenship. Now we've looked at the two major concepts of citizenship. Citizens as users and consumers, and citizens as shapers and makers. Now, just like democracy, citizenship is thought to be more about the rights of the majority of people. So citizenship is grounded on notions like equality and universality. These are like the two, just like democracy, like I said, citizenship and democracy are two sides of a coin. So when you talk democracy, when you talk citizenship, what comes to mind is equality, universality, rights of the majority. These are the things that come to mind. But then again, in spite of the understanding of democracy and citizenship as concepts that guarantee greater equality, there are still tensions in terms of theory of citizenship as a universal concept guaranteeing the rights of the majority of citizens and practice. There is, in many cases, a disconnect between what the theory of citizenship is and the practice of citizenship is. And we're going to look at some of these issues. The first is individual versus collective identity. Now, if I were to ask anyone in this class to tell me about yourself, You'll probably tell me, start with your name, and then you would tell me maybe your sex, if it's not so obvious. And then you would tell me about where you're from, your ethnicity. Now, if I ask the same question from one person to another, you would see that whereas for one person is Yoruba Christian, male. For another person, she is Hausa Muslim female, right? So even in the same states, you still have multiple identities that you have to reconcile. Now, if we're talking about guaranteeing the rights of the majority, if we're talking about democracy guaranteeing the rights of the majority of people or universality, how then do we cater to the individual differences that exists amongst the population? Think, for instance, about LGBTQ plus. I think there's I, and so these things change so much these days that it's hard to keep up, but I'm sure we understand what I'm talking about. Think of those as well, because whether we like it or not, we still have people in that space within our community here in Nigeria. So when we're talking about guaranteeing, when we're talking about democracy or citizenship, guaranteeing the rights of the majority of people, how do we reconcile individual identities versus collective identities? How do I guarantee that in promoting the rights of Amina, who is an Hausa Muslim, I am not offending or abusing the rights of Chinedu, who is an Igbo Christian? How do I ensure that in promoting the rights of Ekanem, who is a straight Christian guy, I am not blocking the rights of Vincent, who identifies as queer and an atheist? I hope we're following what I'm trying to say. So within the same population, we still have to grapple with the individual identities and the collective identities and try to find some balance between ensuring that in promoting one right, we are not taking away the rights of another. Because sometimes it would seem that where the right of one stops, the right of another starts. I'll give an example. Some time ago in the US, a certain baker, Christian baker, was contracted by a gay couple to make their wedding cake. But because of her faith as a Christian, she refused to make the cake for them. She declined service to this couple. On one hand, you would say as an individual and a business owner, she has the right to deny or to offer her services to anybody she chooses based on her faith. She has the right to express her faith through her work. But then on the other hand, she lives in a society where everyone is supposed to have equal rights. And so this people took her to court. And I don't remember the case clearly. If anybody does, you could please tell us the outcome in the comment section. But it would seem the baker lost out in this legal case that happened in the aftermath of her decisions. Now, these are some of those tensions that I am talking about in modern day citizenship, in looking at our rights as individuals and our rights as a collective. How do we ensure that we are not promoting one at the expense of the other? This is a very critical issue in modern day citizenship. Also talking about individual versus collective identity. Let me give some other examples so we can understand in clearer terms what I'm talking about. Very many times you will find that for many people in places of authority, let's look at employment now. Some people would rather employ people who are from their own tribe or religion. So once you send your CV in, you are qualified for a particular position based on your experience and your skills. But the hiring manager would rather someone who is from a different tribe or of a different gender, and would offer the job to that person even though you are more qualified. If we examine ourselves and we're very sincere with ourselves, we will find that even for us at our micro level, we exhibit these biases. We tend to favor people of my sex, people of my religion, people of my class. And all of these things exist. So how can we say then that we're ensuring equality, we're ensuring that the majority are protected, when even our individual biases are getting in the way of our decision making? I remember several instances of fathers who would refuse, an Igbo father, who is a Christian, by the way, and who would refuse his daughter getting married to a Yoruba lady whose parents have friends and attend the same church. Now, these are individuals of different tribes. They are bound by religion. They are both in, say, a society of the church, let's say lay readers. They are both readers in the church, and they get along well. But when it comes to the subject of marriage, my daughter marrying your son, there becomes a problem. There comes a problem because even though we say we are a collective as in an expression of our religion, we still have those individual biases that color the decisions that we make. Now, these are very important issues to consider. At this point, it is not a question of right or wrong, but an ideal citizen or an ideal democratic system should ensure as much as possible that it is the rights of the collective that is promoted. But in doing so, we also do not want to diminish or abuse the rights of individuals. So it's the point I'm trying to make, and why I'm taking a lot of time to explain this, is for us to understand that there are a lot of gray areas in the expression of citizenship and democracy. Even though, like I said, it is thought to be like the best and the form of government that guarantees equality and universality, but there are still these salient issues that I want us to think about. And in thinking about it, we also should look at how we can reconcile it to see that our individual biases do not get in the way of collective good, which is what a model citizen should be, and which is what a model democratic society should promote. Now, let's look at the other concepts of citizenship in other issues in modern day citizenship. Now, we've looked at the individual versus collective identity and the tension. Now, I want us to look at the private life versus public life. And I think an example of these I already shared when I talked about marriage and people who go to the same church not even agreeing for their daughters or their sons, their children, to get married because of tribal differences. So in church, this person appears as, a saintly person, a kind person, an open person. But when it comes to private life and making decisions, this person is still largely driven by individual biases than, looking at things from a more holistic or being open to different views and positions. This is one example of the discrepancy between public and private life. But a greater example would be of our public servants. I will cite an example of a senator. If you remember, there was a senator, I'll call his name. His name is Senator Abu. He's from Adamawa State, and at the time, he was representing a particular constituency in Adamawa State. I don't know how many of us remember him. There was this particular case where he went into a sex shop and he was seen assaulting the sales ladies at this shop. Now, this is somebody who would probably come to the floor of the Senate and would be passing bills that are supposedly supposed to protect the rights of women or protect the vulnerable in the society. His public persona is that, yes, he stands with the people. But this same person in private is captured on camera assaulting a female. The same female that he would claim is promoting or sponsoring bills to protect. Those are the same females who he is maltreating in private. Think also of many of us, pastors, not just politicians, pastors, dads, who outside in our places of work, in our churches, we are, in quotes, model citizens. But then in our houses, we're abusive to our wives. We're abusive to our children. We're abusive to our husbands. We treat the people around us badly. We do not even recognize that they are human beings. We do not recognize that they should be treated with dignity. But then in public, everybody looks at us and thinks, wow, this man is an example of what a model citizen should be, because he preaches in church. Because when he speaks at those company meetings, he speaks with so much passion, he speaks with so much eloquence. But this same person who is supposedly a model citizen, a role model, in private is a monster to the people he has direct oversight for. I mean, I'm not saying a human being, right, should own or possess other human beings, whether they be his wife, husband, or children. I do not believe in possession. I believe people, even my own children, I treat them with dignity. I take their views as very, very important, and their feelings about issues matter to me very much, right? So please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that when I use the word oversight, because I believe a friend of mine taught me that it's important to use the right words so that you do not pass the wrong messages. This is why I'm taking time to explain this. I do not believe that people own other people. So my use of the word oversight is not to say that the man, in quote, owns, the wife and the kids. It's just saying that this is in quotes, his first duty is to his immediate family. Now, if he can't treat his immediate family with dignity, with respect, if he can't be there for his children, instead of being outside lavishing money and abandoning the responsibilities of his own children because he has had a falling out with their mother and wants to punish her, and then he goes out to the pulpit tomorrow to preach, or he goes to the National Assembly to pass bills, or he goes to his workplace to lead meetings, as admirable as he is to everyone, there still is that disconnect, because a model citizen should be seen to be the same in terms of their values and their principles, be it in their private lives or in their public lives. So this is one of the challenges that we have. Sometimes also some other examples that I feel I must mention. We already talked about parental neglect of some parents, and it is just not just men. Some women neglect their responsibilities to their children as well. Some women are also violent to their husbands or abuse their husbands, even if not physically, mentally, or in other ways. I'm also talking about attitudes that a lot of us practice, attitudes that enable social vices like rape, tribalism. I already talked about workplace favoritism that even some of us are guilty of in our micro levels. At our micro levels, we still let certain biases determine the kind of decisions that we make. And our decisions are not universal in consideration because we have chosen just a limited set of things to focus on. And anything that does not align with those things, we would usually just discard those things. So yes, there's rape, there's tribalism, and in terms of social vices, one of the examples I like to give when I give this class is what we do with the influence that we have. There's this very popular social media personality called Tunde Ednut. I'm not afraid of calling names. At some point, and I think maybe the fact that some of us have spoken out about this, I've seen that there's been a change lately, but I'm talking about this because of the importance. And I will talk about it again when we get to another of the slides. He used to have this thing he would call smash or pass, where he would post pictures of ladies clad in skimpy wear. And then the smash or pass is basically saying, would you sleep with this person or would you not sleep with this person? Now, this is somebody with a large following. Someone you could say is a person of influence, objectifying women on his page, and everyone going, yes, I would smash. Yes, I would pass. Yes, I would smash. Yes, I would pass. These are examples of actions that we do that even though we try or like to think that we are model citizens, sometimes because of our private values, if there's anything like that, we find ourselves doing things that are not in the best interest of the majority of people. And I will talk more about this in another slide. So let's go on. Before I go on, just to confirm again, are we all with me? I see the slide is up now. I can see clearly now. Thanks, Wumi. You finally figured it out. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. Wumi, yes, over to you. Let's move on to the next slide. I want to stay on this page so I can see responses. Aliu, thank you. I see you following. Thank you. So what makes a good citizen? 1 second. Is that the next slide? What makes a good citizen? No. We're supposed to look at one more slide. We may have to go a slide back to societal context. One slide back, please. Yes. So different societies have what the idea of citizenship is for them. So in a country like South Africa, people define a good citizen as someone who actively fights racism. This is what South Africans would usually deem a good citizen to be. And that is because of years of apartheid, right? So anyone who is seen to actively stand up against racism in a country like that is seen to be a model citizen. In Russia, for instance, being a good citizen is associated with economic liberalism, and individual self-reliance is valued over collective action. And in countries where there has been years of conflict, talking about countries like Pakistan, Somalia, places like that, right? In places like that, someone who seeks peaceful resolution to issues and reconciliation is thought to be a good citizen. So that's how, just as we look at individual versus collective identity, we looked at private and public life, also different societal contexts have different appreciation of what a model citizen should be. But in general, what makes a good citizen? Now, a good citizen is one who is informed and aware of socioeconomic and political issues. One of the things that many of us young people in Nigeria are crazy about is today it's K-drama. A lot of people here are crazy about K-drama. At some point, it used to be Telemundo. A lot of people are crazy about Big Brother and several other reality shows. This is all well and good. By all means, pursue these things that you enjoy so much. But if we say we are good citizens, as much as we're interested in these issues, we also have to show some interest in social, economic, and political issues. Meaning that when it is time for elections, for instance, we should do what we should do by registering to vote and by actually going out to vote on the day of election. And not just even on election day, when we have elected these public officials, we should make it a point of duty to follow up as to the promises that they made. It may not be at the level of the president or at the level of the governors, at the local government levels, the ward levels. For instance, how many of us here know the names of our local government chairman? How many, if I ask honestly, how many of us here know the names of our local government chairman? How many of us know where their offices are? So when we complain on social media, it is great, but sometimes we can channel these complaints to these people because we elected them in the first place. We voted for them. And so we should demand accountability from them. So we should, enjoy all of those things that we enjoy. But if we say we care, if we say we are good citizens, then we should also show some interest in these issues, social, economic, and political issues that affect us. A good citizen should foster tolerance and respect for human rights in all relationships. I was talking about Tunde not the other time, promoting the dignity of women or people generally and children generally. That is what a model citizen should do. So if you have a platform and if you're a person of influence and what you do is to objectify a certain sex or gender and open them up for abuse and ridicule, you are enabling those cultures that perpetuate certain actions against certain sexes. For instance, rape. If you're having discussions with your friends, let's even move away from the social media influencers so that we don't take ourselves, absolve ourselves of responsibility. With your friends, when you're sitting down to have drinks or you're sharing memes and funny videos, if someone shares a video to you, like for instance, the smash or pass videos, rather than laugh about it, why don't you use the moment to just, instead of even waka pass, why don't you use the chance to teach somebody, to tell them that, guy, this thing where you they do, pure, because this person could be my sister. It could be your sister's picture that is up there for smash or pass tomorrow. So rather than just gloss over these issues, rather than laugh about it, even with our own friends, and I think this is more for us, the guys, even with our own friends, why don't we speak up and say, hey, we cannot continue to laugh over these issues, because these issues that we take lightly, these issues that we make light of, these are the issues that are emboldening some people to think that they have a right over women's bodies as to rape them, or a right to be abusive to women because they refused their advances. What I am saying is, in our own small sphere of influence as model citizens, we should be seen to be protecting the rights of the majority.
Another example, comedians. I see comedians in a bid to be funny or to create content, especially now in this social media era where everybody is a content creator. You produce contents, for instance, that are insultive to people who are less able, or people who are differently able, not less able, sorry, people who are differently able. These days, we do not use the words less, what's the word, disabled anymore, as a way to show dignity of, you know, the entire human race and different segments of population. The word these days is differently able. So you see a comedian making a joke about a Down syndrome person, somebody who has Down syndrome, or somebody who is on a spectrum, or somebody who has one medical condition or the other, in the name of comedy. And we laugh and we share these things. We share these things. If we are model citizens, we should try not to promote things that bring certain people or certain segments of society down. Instead, we should use every opportunity that we have to let the people doing these things know that, no, we cannot do this, because these people are humans too, and their rights should be promoted. Another example, sharing of porn, or when I say porn, sex tapes of people that some aggrieved or an ex has decided to put out. A lot of us are quick to share these things. Or a sex tape of a child, a minor. A lot of us probably derive some kind of, I don't know, kick from sharing these things, knowing fully well that the faces of these minors are out there, the faces of these men, these women are out there. What do we stand to gain by circulating these things? Now, this is where I am calling for individual responsibility, because we cannot claim to be model citizens when we do not do things that respect and promote the rights and the dignity of other people. This is linked to the second point of taking steps to combat disadvantage and injustice, promoting collective action and collective spirit. Like I said, participating in community and national affairs, engaging in public debates and political life like voting. We talked about that. Promoting participatory democracy in politics. I did talk about not just in our homes, in our offices as well. How are we ensuring in the policies or the actions that we take, are we ensuring that the rights of everyone in our team is promoted? Are we ensuring that we are fair to everyone on our team? So the idea of citizenship should not be something distant. It should not be, it should not always be about holding political office holders or people in areas of major influence to account. Good citizenship calls for individual responsibility in the face of everything that is happening. And the final point I want to make on what makes a good citizen here, it's a very, very difficult one. Being passionate and hopeful about change. Now, it's difficult because we live in a country where our leaders have shown us by their actions time and time again that they do not care for the interest of the majority. And so in a country like Nigeria, it is hard to keep faith. It is hard to be hopeful. But then again, like anything in life, even if it is a personal pursuit, if we do not believe, even if a teeny weeny bit, that there is a prospect of a positive outcome, energy is something that is very important. If we do not believe in our hearts that change can happen, or that our actions within those areas those little areas where we have control, if we do not believe that our actions can make difference, it does two things. One, it sucks the energy out of us, and then it also blocks the possibility of anything good happening. So this is a plea to all of us. As much as Nigeria has shown us shiggy, Nigeria is showing plenty of people shiggy. But you see, we can't give up hope, especially because we still live in this country. We can't say, oh, we do not care anymore. I know a lot of people felt bad about the outcome of the last elections. Some people felt that they were robbed. Whether there is merit to this or not is another thing. But however way you feel, we have a president. We have a country. We don't have another country. So it is in our best interest to do things that we can do to ensure that he succeeds. And we're not doing this for him. We're doing it for ourselves and for our children. Because if he fails, we all fail. Whoever, it doesn't matter who sits there. But if the person fails, what that means is we are all going to feel the bite, as we are all feeling the bite of the policies that this current government has adopted, for instance. So if there has to be any change at all as model citizens, we need to have, even if a small light, a small ray of hope, we need to keep it alive and try. We don't only have to look at big actions, the small things. I keep saying it, in our own sphere of influence, within your family, how are you treating your children? How are you treating your wife? How are you treating your husband? In your company, how are you treating your colleagues? How are you treating your co-workers? In your churches, the places where you socialize, how are you treating the people? Are your actions promoting the welfare or well-being of the generality of the people, or your actions are even increasing discrimination and making life difficult for different sets of people? These are things that we need to ask ourselves. Okay? I think this leads me to the very, very last slide. Building active citizen advocacy. It's important to build public interest. Like I said, within our different spheres of influence, we should start developing people's knowledge about and critical consciousness to resist dominant values. I was talking about rape culture. I was talking about tribalism. I was talking about, many of these vices that seem to be perpetuated because we seem to gloss over issues. We seem to jest about issues that are important instead of doing something about them. This is another call for us to ensure that within our sphere of influence, we are taking every opportunity. On Facebook, for instance, or whatever social platforms you are, somebody has said something and you think this thing, you don't think, this thing brings down a particular section of society, whether it is sex, whether it is religion, whether it is people with special needs. You should use every opportunity that you get to educate those people, because that's the only way change is going to happen. And we should promote civic education and advocacy training. This is why I commend the Electoral College for what they're doing here. But it should not just be here, it should be in different forums. I just learned that forums is a right word. I used to think fora was the only right word. So in different forums of fora, like our schools, for instance, we should ensure, and even our workplaces, we should ensure that we incorporate citizenship studies or citizenship education into our company programs, our school programs, because this is something that all of us need to be a part of. And we should pursue broad-based citizen action. Remember that analogy about a broom. If you take a stick of broom, it's easier to break. But if you have a bunch, it's much more difficult. In trying to create change, we should look for blocks like us. And if we can have different blocks, people who have the same, who share the same interests, people who are passionate about the same issues, and I'm talking about us as individuals and as groups, as institutions, like the Electoral College, to look for other institutions, other groups that share the same ideals, and together use our voices in their numbers to advocate for change where it matters. We should use every avenue, including the media, to push this agenda to ensure that issues that would provide or that would ensure that the rights and well-being of the majority of citizens are at the front burner. Those are the issues we should be jointly pursuing. Advocacy that is geared to building citizenship and reshaping political culture draws heavily on the theory and practice of participation and popular education. A new practice, this is in conclusion, a new practice of citizen leadership requires an integrated strategy involving participatory education processes to build people's ability to analyze their reality and internalize their rights as citizens. It also takes new alliances and broad-based democratic organizations that tap the power of working together, as well as respecting and using people's differences. Ladies and gentlemen, that is my presentation. Thank you for listening. We have 92 people in class. Thank you all 92 of you. With the permission of our moderator, with the guide or leading of our moderator, we shall now take questions and some comments.
Thank you so much, sir, for the very insightful contribution and lecture we had. We learned so much. If you do have a question, please, with a show of hand, can you raise your icon hand on the chat box, or you can indicate so that way we can unmute your mic and you can ask your questions.
The moderator, I see some hands up. If you can, moderate this session so they can ask their questions. There are two participants with hands raised.
We can unmute their mic. Please unmute your mic. I'm trying to see.
There's Musa. Can we start with
Musa?
Musa?
Please, can you unmute your mic?
Musa Saliu, you can go ahead, please.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. It's actually, this is the first time I have come across all my horizon of understanding has been widened with respect to democracy, autocracy, and the politocracy and other things that thank you very much for that. So actually, in the series of your presentation, you made mention of Russia, where they do practice economic liberalism. Oh, sorry for my pronunciation, actually. Yes. So I think my mind has been taken away, or I failed to grab, in the sense that is this the political, electoral, the economic elite, or the, how is it practiced in Russia? Sorry, please, I need just a glance or an overview over that.
Okay, so thank you, Musa, for your question. I also want to say here that I'm not an expert. I'm, like all of you, a student of life. I'm also learning. So there might be people here who know more than me. If you feel you can
respond to any of the remarks, any of the questions, please go ahead. I spoke about Russia within the context of what in some countries, the idea of a good citizen is. Before I came to Russia, I'd mentioned South Africa, that a good citizen is one who is seen to be fighting against racism. And this is because of the um, because of the fact that they had come from years of apartheid, right? So for them, for a country like that, a good citizen is one who is able to fight against racism. In places where, for instance, war-torn countries like Somalia, like Palestine, Gaza, a lot of these places, good citizens are people who are making moves for reconciliation, right? So in places like Russia as well, people who support initiatives of government, initiatives that seem to promote the individual well-being rather than the collective. Rather than the individual. And by collective, it's more like a blind kind of loyalty to the government, because what the government sees as the good, for instance, of the country may not be what the individuals in that country on an individual level see as the good of the country. So in places like that, almost the same as communist countries like China, the government sees a good citizen as one who more or less follows, obeys most of the policies and declarations. Okay, so just to say that in different places, these things wear a slightly different look. I don't know if I've answered your question, Musa, but if I have not, there will be a chance for somebody else to respond to that. I see two hands up. Let's start with the permission of our moderator. Let's start with Dami, and then we'll come to Akudo. Dami, please, can you go ahead and ask your question or make your comment?
Hey, thank you, sir. Well spoken. You mentioned obviously about like the democratic structures. Yes, there's obviously different forms of democracy. So I'm actually taking the course from the UK, right? So here in the UK, obviously, we run a parliamentary system, and obviously the parliamentary system is to keep the government lean and small, but then also to keep up that consistent communication between the Prime Minister, Parliament, and then also the freedom of information for the public. So we have Prime Minister's questions time, right? There's a recent discussion going on in Nigeria about switching from a Senate and a House of Rep to a parliamentary system, especially at this time where there's not much communication. They've highlighted there's not much communication coming from the presidency, from himself directly, right? So what would that process of transition be democratically in Nigeria to move towards a different form of democracy, obviously without losing, in quotes, the Nigerian identity, the Nigerian spread between all the geopolitical points? Obviously, I know that you might not be an expert in it, but what's your thoughts on it?
Hello, sir, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if Dami, you heard anything I said. Sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize. That again, I say I'm not an expert on these issues, but I have been following the discussions, and even recently, just recently, about 2 days ago, I think it was, one of the wealthiest and most influential persons in northern Nigeria, Dantata, lent his voice to the call for a parliamentary system of government. I am aware that very many people have been calling for the convening of the constitutional conference, a national constitutional conference, to look at our constitution as adopted, as practiced, and to look at making it more participatory in terms of the input. And even though several governments have tried to convene that, for some reason, it would appear that the governments of the day, as we've had them in successive years, somehow are not open to the idea of going by their body language, or they are afraid that if they were to convene that kind of national confirm, that the clamor for separation of the country would be, the clamor would be louder than ever. But do I support the idea of a constitutional conference, a confab? Absolutely, yes. Do I support the idea of decentralizing the government, so moving from the federal system of government to a parliamentary system? Yes, I do. But if ever we are going to evolve from the system of democratic governance that we have now to the parliamentary system of governance, a lot rests on the people we have elected, our representatives at the national and state assemblies. Because if there is going to be any change at all, it will be changes or amendments to the Constitution. And it is only our representatives, of course, with pressure from pressure groups and individuals like us through different forums, that would see to it that that happens. And this is also another challenge for us in the choice of candidates that we vote for to represent us. We should ensure that we are looking out for people who not only have the interests of the majority at heart, instead of going in there for personal aggrandizement. We should ensure that it's people who are thinking of the well-being of the generality of the people, who would listen to our expressed wishes, that we are putting in those positions. We have a long way to go, right? But we have to start from somewhere. And part of that process is us talking about it as we're doing now. Part of that also is putting pressure through different advocacy groups on the elected officials, particularly the legislative arm of government. And then in the choice of the people that we elect into positions, ensuring that it is people with know-how and with the passion and with the interest of the majority of people at heart. It is those people that we are putting in place. Dami, I hope I have done my best to answer your question. If I haven't, I am hoping that someone else might be able to say something about this. But I'd like to move on to the other person who has their hands up, and that is Akudo. Please go ahead and ask your question. Or make your comment, as it were. Oh, okay. I see that you put a question in the, yeah. Your question is, could you please speak on protecting the rights of the majority versus the rights of the minority, and cases where protecting the rights of the majority over the minority may lead to more harm than good? I don't think I have an example of how protecting the rights of either part, the majority or the minority, might lead to harm. I raise this issue just for us to think broadly about the issue of citizenship, especially as relates individual versus collective identity. because it's not as straightforward and as simple as it looks. For instance, the example of the baker that I gave in the US, I did say at the time that I don't know how that case ended in court. If you know, could you please say in the comments? But I think that even though this baker, as an individual, had the right to express her faith through her work, and her faith, in quotes, did not allow her, in quotes, to offer her service to people she felt, based on her faith, were doing something contrary to our religion. The law was on the side of the people because the law felt that irrespective of their sexual orientation or preferences, she did not have a right to deny services to those people. So it depends on what side of the divide that you're in. I'm not speaking to say the baker was right, the people were wrong, or the baker was right. I only brought this up for the purpose of debate so that we can start to think about the different dynamics to this issue of citizenship and the universality and the equality that citizenship and democracy are supposed to promote. Sometimes issues are not so clear-cut, so straightforward. I would appreciate if you have, for instance, an opinion that we think would benefit this class. I would really be happy, Bakudo, if you could air that view, if you're disposed to airing that view so that we can learn. Okay, I see she left already. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Back to you, the moderator. I don't see any other hands up, and I do not see other questions here. I do not see any other questions here. But back to you, moderator. Oh, yes,
Thank
somebody,
you so much,
sorry, let me say this. Sorry, Uyore Justin Agogo, thank you. In the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights, the Supreme Court of the US, in a 7-2 decision, ruled in favor of the cake shop. Okay, so I got it wrong. They ruled in favor of the cake shop, explaining she had the right to freely exercise our service of choice. So I got it wrong. Thank you very much, Uyore Justin Agogo. Like I said, I don't have a monopoly of knowledge. Sometimes we tend to mix these things up, but when we contribute like this, then we help each other to learn. So thank you. I hope we all can take the points that Uyore Justin has helped us to understand here. So depending on what side of the divide, I'm sure this decision would not have gone well with the LGBTQ community because they would have felt that their rights were denied them by this Supreme Court decision. So I'm just saying there are still many issues in citizenships that are up for debate, clarification. These forums like this give us an opportunity, to continue to discuss. And the idea is that as we continue to discuss, we will develop a model of democracy that would ensure as much as possible. There is no 100% or perfect democracy, but what we want to see is evolve to the point that we're taking all different views and consideration and ensure that in our policies, in our decisions, the interest of the majority of the people is protected. Yes. Thank you again for everyone who's asked a question and given a comment. You have made our discussions and our class more robust. I have also learned from you as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for today. We had a very, very, yes, thank you so much, sir. We had a very great session today. The lecture was very insightful and a beautiful presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating and asking your questions. We look forward to having a better conversation and lecture and interaction in our next lecture. Have a beautiful evening, everyone, and cheers. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.